Good to see you. So you said you're from the Midwest, right, originally?
Yeah, I'm from Grand Rapids. So it's just up the lake a bit. And I ended up in films in a quite peculiar fashion. I was a product of the Christian Reformed Church, Dutch Calvinist Church. Went to Westside Christian, Grand Rapids Christian High, Calvin College, which is also a seminary. And in the 60s sort of came along, and I fell in love with movies which were forbidden by the church. We were not allowed to see films, or theater, or card playing, or dancing, or drinking. And but I sort of fell the whole notion of Ingmar Bergman because he was working in this same area, and I started reading and trying to see films. But it was very hard to see films in Grand Rapids, so I went to New York for a summer. To the Center for Mass Communications, which is now called the Columbia Film School, and so I could just see these films, and you know, my pivot sort of switched from being a kind of proselytizer, you know. Used to go to door to door, you know, have you met Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, that kind of stuff. And I started becoming more of I found a different pulpit. And through one sort of coincidence, I ended up in the film business. And that was, I was in a bar in New York. And this book had just come out, the paperback of Pauline Kael's I Lost It at the Movies. And the person I was sitting next to, I was saying how much I liked this book. And he got up and went to the phone, came back, and he said, "You want to meet her?" And I said, "Oh, yeah. He said, "Well, we'll go over tomorrow night." She lives on West End. He was the son of a Jewish film critic, Robert Warshaw, who died young. And she had sort of taken him under her wing, so we went over there the next night. And I had seen maybe 15 films at that time, but I had a lot of opinions. And we stayed late into the night drinking, and I ended up crashing on the sofa. And the next morning, she said to me, "You don't want to be a minister, you want to be a film critic. And we're going to stay in touch. And you're going to contact me every week, and you're going to send me everything you write." And eventually I became one of the Paulettes, part of that circle. She had around 10 or 12 young critics, all boys, that would disseminate her mission. That's where I met David Denby and Gary Arnold and a lot of these guys, and Roger Ebert was one. And then she also said, "If you want to go to film school, I can get you into UCLA." And sure enough, she picked up the phone. I got into UCLA. I got to UCLA, and she got me a reviewing job at the LA Free Press, which was the radical paper. 100,000 subscription. And off I was to the races. Just seeing movies, writing about movies, living movies. It was an exciting time in Los Angeles, 1968, but it wasn't that exciting for me because I was mostly just sitting in dark rooms watching old movies. But when I hear about it, it sounds quite exciting. And then I went to UCLA and went to AFI the first year. They had a film school. But things kind of fell apart. I left the AFI over a dispute, a protest. I lost my job at the Free Press over a dispute, over Easy Rider. I lost my marriage over a dispute, and I didn't have any money. So, and I didn't have a place to live. So now I'm kind of drifting around. And not quite living in my car, but more or less living in my car. And I had also been disowned by Pauline because Pauline wanted me to take a job in Seattle being a critic, and I had turned it down. But now I was really on board. And so I was drifting around. I had a pistol at that time. And the softcore porn theaters were open all night long so people could sleep there, so you could go. And after several weeks of this, I had a pain in my stomach, which turned out to be a bleeding ulcer at the age of 27 from all the drinking and the anxiety and the anger. And when I was in the hospital, I had this metaphor occurred to me. And the metaphor was of the taxi cab. This yellow coffin floating through the sewers of the city with this young man trapped in it. And it struck me as a metaphor of my life, that this kid behind the glass seems to be surrounded by people, but in fact he's trapped and he's alone. And that the taxi cab is the metaphor for loneliness and inability to communicate. And so I had that idea in the hospital. I got out of the hospital, and I wrote that script rather quickly. And I didn't write it as to sell or anything. I wrote it as self-therapy. I had been making some money covering scripts for studios, $5, $10 to do a synopsis of a script. So I knew what scripts looked like, and but it wasn't written in traditional style. It was written in chapters and so forth. And I wrote it, and then I left to Los Angeles. I didn't give it to anyone. There's no one to give it to. And I drifted around the country for 4 or 5 months, sort of just getting my mental health back, visiting old college friends. And then I circled back around to LA again because my brother, who had been a missionary in Japan, lost his faith in his wife. Now he had come back. So we started writing this Japanese gangster script together called Yakuza. So that's, I got into filmmaking for the best of all reasons because I had a problem that could only be addressed by a story, by me telling a story. I had to write about this kid before I became this kid. I had to exercise him. And so often, people ask me, how to write a screenplay and all that. There's no real way to teach it. And the people who say they can teach it to you are all lying. And they're all writing bad, and none of them are selling scripts. Because the notion of a script is totally fungible. What was a good script 4 years ago is not a good script right now. A scene that is a good scene on page 30 is not a good scene on page 40. And you have to have a kind of feeling for this. And what are the new metaphors? What are the contemporary metaphors? And if you're going to try to break into filmmaking, you can't go and look at a movie and say, I can make a movie like that. Because they don't want you to make a movie like that. They already got somebody to make a movie like that. What you have to do is show them the movie that they haven't seen before. You have to show them Get Out, or Colossal. Something, you're mixing a genre, you're doing something interesting. But now, of course, because of the new economics of film, everybody is now a filmmaker. It used to be, if you made movies, you sort of made money, because movies were so expensive to make that the people who made them got paid. Now we have democratized the art form so that it's now right alongside poetry and music and theater and painting. In other words, you can now make movies and lose money and not get paid. You can make a $50,000 film and lose $50,000. And people are doing it just that, right and left. Whereas in the past, if you made a $5 million film and it lost $5 million, you still got paid. Now you don't even get paid. And as a result, there's such a surfeit of product. There were 13,000 submissions last year at Sundance. That's just one festival. Now that's not taking into account the 456 scripted TV series that are now being shot. So it is virtually everything we have learned in the last 100 years about filmmaking no longer applies. And in a way, that's really exciting. But one of the problems with educating with a film school or a film education is you're essentially going to be taught by someone who has learned the old rules. And in fact, they are old rules. And if you're smart about what you're doing, like even David Lynch, if you've been watching Twin Peaks, even David realized he couldn't do what he did 25 years ago. He had to go further out. He had to jump off the edge. You have to really reinvent your stuff. And so it's very hard to teach. And every artist is inherently an autodidact. You sort of figure it out. That's where this notion of problems and metaphors gets so crucial, because you all have a problem. When I teach screenwriting, I usually, for the first class, I give a sort of lecture like this one. And then I ask everyone to write down in no more than 2 sentences each their 2 most pressing personal problems at this moment. I say, I will not be able to take all of you. We're only going to have 10 kids in the class. And I really don't care if you guys can write or not, because you can learn to write. What I care about is your problems. And I want to have 10 interesting people with me in this class. And so tell me your race, your sex, age, and then write your problems. And I will read them quite quickly. And I will pick what I see as a kind of interesting group of 10 kids. And if you are in the class, your problems will become the joint property of the class. And if you're not in the class, it's thrown away, forgotten. That often clears out a certain number of them. And then, we start, we don't talk about writing till around maybe 5 or 6 weeks in. It's all about therapy and group therapy and how how you can use the medium of storytelling to understand your problem better. And the one thing that you have that is unique to you is your problem. Because even if it's the same problem as the guy next to you, self-image, can't tell my parents I'm gay, whatever your problem is, minority anger, it's not exactly the same as the person next to you, because everybody has a different gradation. And if you can refine what's unique about your problem, and one of the ways you refine this is through the metaphor, then you have a channel of uniqueness, and then you're doing something that only you're doing. And that's, I think, the only way to get into this very crowded space as a writer, unless, of course, you just, want to, work in, work behind the camera, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot of jobs out there with all this product that's going on. There's a lot of work. And so you can make a living behind the camera. You can't make a good one because nobody's paying anybody, but they're making a lot of stuff. Well, I've sort of wandered on for a while.
Well, that's interesting. So lean into your problems, you'd say?
No, I would say just you have to constantly define it. What is? I thought my problem at that time was loneliness, sense of being cut off, inability to communicate. And then as I worked through the metaphor of the taxi cab, I started to realize that it wasn't just loneliness. It was self-imposed loneliness. It wasn't somebody who was lonely. It was someone who was choosing to be lonely. And how was he making those choices? So he started. And the structure of Taxi Driver, very, very simple one. You have a guy alone. In fact, the first time I realized I might actually be a filmmaker, because I was a film critic. I never thought I would be a filmmaker. And then I saw this film by Robert Bresson, Pickpocket. And it's about this kid who writes in a journal. He goes out and steals stuff, and he goes back and writes in the journal some more. I saw that film, I said, I could make a film like that. That's just a kid who writes in a journal and goes out and does something and comes back and writes some more. And sure enough, 3 years later, that's what I did with Taxi Driver. Only in this case, he was a taxi driver, and you had a situation where the girl he desired, he couldn't have. The girl he could have, he didn't want, so he tried to kill the father figure of the one. He fails and kills the father figure of the other, and then, in an ironic twist, becomes the hero. So that's the whole plot. And I found this method, it doesn't work the same for every script, but I have a film coming out this fall where I went back to that, same thing. As you age in life, your problems evolve, and at some point you have to do your midlife crisis movie, which for me, the metaphor ended up being a drug delivery boy in Light Sleeper. And now you're starting to do your has my life had any value sort of problem. When you start losing friends, and you realize there aren't that many people in front of you in the queue before you hit the edge of the cliff, you start thinking, oh, that's my new problem, and how should I address it? And So I still, I've been at this 50 years, and I'm still sort of working at it the same way.
Now, you've been known to do very, very precise, complete outlines even. You still work that way?
Yes, I do. I try not to write. See, I don't think screenwriting is writing. I think it's part of the oral tradition. It's telling a story. You know, all it is. We can work up a story right here. You know, 45 people in a dark room, and an alarm goes off. Suddenly, someone runs in the back and said he's got a gun. He runs out. 2 other people jump up and start hitting each other. Okay, now we go. We're going. I got to start running. Well, that's all screenwriting is, telling a story. So it has to be told orally and repeatedly. And so every time I'm evolving a story, you start making outline. What are what they call the beats? What are the 8, 10, 15, 20 things that happen? You know, first scene, auditorium. The second scene, typhoon in Japan. Boom, whatever. And then you start telling this. And the first time you tell it, maybe it's only 15, 20 minutes long, and you try to judge people's response to it. And each time you tell it, you re-outline. Now, you don't really care what people say about your idea, because they're not going to have that much of value to say. What you really care about is their body language. Do you have them? Do you have them? And you can judge by their posture, by, and all of a sudden you're starting to lose them. It's just like a stand-up comic saying, I'm losing this crowd, I'm losing this crowd. And Raymond Chandler said once, if you get in trouble, have somebody with a gun walk in, because the reader is going to be so grateful he's there, they're not going to ask why. And it's the same thing is true. Here, I'm telling you this story. And then I say, and these 2 big black guys drive up wearing red suits in a purple convertible. Boom, I got your back. I also got these, black dudes in a purple convertible that I have to deal with. But I do have you back. Now I got to somehow work them into the story. Well, maybe they're brothers, maybe they're, start thinking fast, And so you find yourself, as you tell the story, embellishing it in order to make it better, because you're losing the audience. And also, every time you tell it, you can see from your outline where your different types of scenes are falling in. Exposition scene, comic relief, action scene, mystery scene, boom, boom, boom. And if you see in your outline, you have 3 exposition scenes in a row. That's not going to fly. And if you tried telling that, you would see that right then and there, because you start telling a person 3 exposition scenes in a row, and they're going to get bored. And so if you can tell a story for 45 minutes and hold somebody, I think you have a movie. And if you're not quite sure, invite somebody for coffee or a drink and start telling them your story. And then toward the end of it, go to the bathroom and come back, and don't resume it. If they don't ask you how the story ended, you don't have a story. You've got it. And if you can't hold them for 45 minutes, what are you doing writing that thing? Well, if you outlined it enough, you're getting a pretty comprehensive outline now. And you're getting, it's getting up there. You got 37 things to work through on your outline. And so you can start putting page counts in. You can start saying, now, I think this whole opening scene will be about 3/4 of a page. Next scene will be 2 pages if you're going on the idea of a page per minute. So now you say, when this thing happens, we'll have it on page 27. And I think that's a good time for that to happen. Now you're writing it, and lo and behold, it happens on page 33. So you say to yourself, well, was my outline wrong? Or am I just being too verbose? Am I just dragging my feet and being too talkative? And you think about it and you say, no, the script is good, the outline is wrong. Let's re-outline it so I'm on page 33 now. And how does that affect the arc of everything afterward? And I've done that. I've also had it the other way around, where I backed up. And so at that point, you have a 1-sheet legal pad with maybe 30 to 40 little descriptions of scenes, and you have a running page count. And, so now you're projecting the script to come in at 108 pages. And you sort of know what's going to happen on page 95. When you, and then, so that's where that comes from. Mm-hmm. It comes up from the oral tradition. It doesn't come from a need to have an outline. You have the outline in your head every time you tell the story anyway. And so why not put it down? And one of 2 things happens when you tell this repeatedly. One is you get sick of it, and it dies. And that is a very fortuitous day for you, because you have just saved yourself the pain of writing a script that no one wants to read, much less buy. And you have talked it to death, and it is now, the burden has been removed from your shoulders. And you've spared yourself. There's nothing more debilitating than writing scripts that nobody wants to read or see. And you write 4 or 5 scripts that nobody wants to read or see, and you're burnt. You're fried. So every time you can not write one of those scripts, you've saved yourself that experience. You have it away written it because you've written it orally, but you haven't actually put it down in words yet. The other thing that can happen is it goes the other way, and the idea says to you, I am sick of being told. I want to exist. I want to be written. I want to become flesh. I want to become real now. I want to become words. And when that happens, that's also a very fortuitous day, because then you're at work. And it's going to go quite fast, because you've been talking and thinking it out so long. You just know the cadence of the scenes. You've talked about the scene so many times. He comes in, he says this, he does this. And so, at that point, depending on how much free time you have, but I mean, I don't see why a script should take more than a month. The Taxi Driver was 2 weeks. If it takes more than a month, there may be something that's wrong. When somebody says to me, would you read this thing? And I just dashed it off. I did it in a few weeks, and just tell me I said, oh yeah, I'd love to read that. Somebody says, I have a script I've been working on 2 years now. My heart sinks, because I don't want to read that script they've been working on for 2 years. I just don't. And but all of that said, you do find your own path. And I'm just telling you about my path. You can put somebody else in this chair. We'll have different advice for you. And that advice worked for them. And so, just because my advice has worked for me doesn't mean it'll work for you.
Do you bring the same sort of approach to directing, like in terms of working all the shots out beforehand? Or?
No, directing is very different. Writing, you're all powerful as a writer. Everything is the way you want it. It's kind of lonely, but you do have that kind of power. Directing is very communal. You get there and 100 people say good morning. But you're not very powerful, really, because you're at the mercy of the budget, the weather, the individual talents you're dealing with. And it is a different language. Just like screenwriting is not about words, about written words. It's about oral words. Directing is not about words. So, yeah, as a screenwriter, I write Black DePaul Cup. This is not a Black DePaul Cup. I look at that in the director, and what it is this right here. Black DePaul Cup is just 3 words we use to reference this, but it's not this at all. So a director, you're using this as an idea. And so you take a script, which is written in words, and now you say, what does it mean in images? And even if it's your own script, you say, how can I turn this dead thing into a living being? How can I save this script? How can I rethink it? And then you start getting involved with visual logic. Visual logic is not the same as literary logic. And I find that now you have to be very prepared to direct because of all the logistics involved. You have to know what kind of lenses, what kind of lights, what kind of track. Time is money, so you really do have to be prepared. But still, there is something about directing that is very much seat of the pants. You just sort of feel it. You get there and you feel it. And you maybe start seeing these shots, or you don't see these shots, and you just sort of feel it. And on this last film, I decided to do a film where I didn't move the camera. I love to move the camera. So I'm going to do a film without moving the camera. No tilts, no pans, 1-3-3 format, like I do. And one day we're out there, and I said, I think we're going to move the camera today. The cinematographer says, why? I said, I don't know. I'm just feeling today's the day to move a camera. This scene, we should move a camera. The only time we'll move it in the whole film, we'll do it this scene. Because I don't want the audience to get the feeling that I can't break my own rules. So I'm going to set up all these rules and then just break them out of sheer perversity once, and then go back to them again. Now that's an instinctual thing. That's like timing. That's like a joke. How do all you can tell the same joke, and about half of you, no one will laugh, because you don't have the timing for it. So there is something instinctual where you just feel, we're going to this move. I think I should drift away from the characters. Now with the and with the new technology, you can do so much more in post too. You can, in some ways, reshoot your movie in post. But I think that you really have to go through a real period of genuine study. It takes about 2-3 months. Like for Dog Eat Dog, I looked at crime films, and I kept looking at them over and over again. How can I make a crime film in 2015. What does a crime film look like in 2015? You know, after Scorsese and after Tarantino and after Guy Ritchie, what do you do now? So part of that's part of your thought process, and the one afterward, the opposite. How do you make a spiritual film now? What does a spiritual film look like in 2017? And so you study, you watch, and it comes to you. And that's the beauty of it. I was saying to lunch with Scorsese a while back, and I was saying, we were agreeing that the thing we like most about directing is you come out on the set on a particular day, and something is wrong. Now, you had figured out what you were going to do that day. You're all prepared to do it, and it just isn't there. Whether it's the performer or the script or the set, just something feels wrong. It feels lifeless. And at that point, you say, well, you can clear the set and give me 15 minutes. And the beauty of it is, if you've been doing it long enough, they clear the set and you're all alone now, and you start walking around, and you know it will come to you. It will come to you. Something is going to come to you. I say that to Barty. He says, when it first happens to you and you're young, you're terrified. I don't know what to do. But if you've been doing it long enough, you say, if I just wait, it's going to come to me. And then all of a sudden it does. Something whole different. And you call everybody back in and it says, you know what we were going to do? We're going to do it completely different now. And so you can't be afraid of breaking your own rules or changing things. On the other hand, you can't be so timid that you don't leave room for improvisation, and take some chances, live with them. Some of them, you'll die with.
Well, it's interesting because it sounds like you had this notion about, well, you lean into the problem, go to the problem, and that's where you're going to find the creative thing. And the directing, it's like you look forward to those problems, right, on the set?
Yeah, well, I mean, a problem, when I talk about a writing problem, I talk about an existential problem, a spiritual problem, a psychological problem. When I talk about directing, I'm talking about essentially a visual logistic problem. Because if you're going to deal, if you're going to shoot a film like Antonioni does, you're not going to do that on the day. That's going to come out of how you view the world.
We're going to have time for some questions. If you want to come on down over here, we've got some questions for Paul. So there's a microphone over down here, so don't be afraid. If you got questions about any aspect of filmmaking, screenwriting, directing. You mentioned 456 streaming. I think it's actually now approaching over 500. What do you think about the whole streaming thing? I'm
talking about, the number I was talking about was 456 scripted.
Scripted, right.
And it could be more. Yeah. It's a huge bubble. We'll see how it bursts. Obviously, it's not sustainable. Unless they find a way to make more hours in the day, this amount of material is just lost. Yeah. We know that theatrical is dying, and so we have all these new platforms, and they all have different ways to monetize themselves. And then you have people like Amazon who are using a film as a loss leader. They don't really care that much. if they make money. If you go on Amazon and end up buying some toilet paper and a vacuum cleaner while you were looking for a movie, Amazon is happy, because that's why they made the movie, to sell you that vacuum cleaner. So you have model, it's such a wacky model, and time will tell how much they overspent. And then you have the Netflix model, which is kind of a monster that's eating itself, and I don't know how much longer it can go on, but they have to spend several, like $4 million a year. So now they're making a film with Scorsese for $100 million. No studio would make that film. But they don't care, because and they buy up all of this product. People get their money back on all these films, but nobody ever sees these films because they don't advertise them. Any of you who have spent any of your idle time cruising through Netflix, you will realize that dozens, hundreds of movies have come out that you never heard of. And and somebody paid for these, and Netflix bought them all. And it just, it operates on this model of the subscription, and the larger our library, the more subscribers we get.
I'm just curious, how many of you go see a movie in a theater like once a week? Did you just raise your hands? Okay. Do you think that that's a loss, that people may not be watching movies in theaters as much as they used to?
Well, it all depends on the type of movie. I mean, certain movies are better in theaters. If you got kids, that's great. That's why those movies are also successful now, because parents love to see their kids interact with other kids. You have some huge spectacles, IMAX kind of spectacle. Well, that's good for a theater. Or if you have a movie that audiences interact with. Now, how many of you saw Get Out in a theater? Wasn't that great?
Yeah.
I mean, that was great. Particularly, because when you go to the theater, you know you're going to see it with a mixed race audience. That's just the nature of the film. And you know you're going to get a lot of talk back. I was sitting there watching it, and then Allison Williams was on screen, and a woman behind me yells, "She's an African snatcher!" And you can't buy that at home. And also, certain kinds of film require a certain amount of commitment. If you're making a film that's kind of rigorous, you want people to come to the theater and say, "I'm willing to give this time." At that point, it becomes like going to church. No one leaves a church service because it got boring, because they knew before they got there it was going to be boring. But they made a commitment to go. And certain kind of movies, so if you watch Quiet Passion, this nice Terrence Davies film about Emily Dickinson, you've made a kind of commitment to watch a Terrence Davies movie about Emily Dickinson, and you enjoy it. So those are the kinds of films that are really designed for theaters. The regular multiplex thing, I don't know. You go to a multiplex, to me, it just looks like a funeral home with 10 rooms. There's not much sense going. And,
Do we have some questions back there?
Yeah. I had two questions.
Go ahead and say your name. Speak loudly, okay?
My name's Daniel Schwartz. My first question is, you talked about going deep to begin a screenplay with your.
You're gonna have to throw your voice more.
Oh,
Speak up.
Sorry. You talked about going deep, writing a screenplay based on problems and deep stuff. Have you ever written a screenplay on starting in the opposite direction, where you just have a great visual, or you sort of start from a scene and then it works?
It can work the other way. we'll start with a time period. You can say, I would like to do something about ancient Rome, Victorian England. How can I find my problem in Victorian England? So now you're backing into it. Or you get a novel, and like I adapted Last Temptation of Christ. A big book, probably 10 different adaptations possible in that book. It has a Greek Orthodox foundation. I'm Dutch Calvinist. Scorsese is Italian Roman Catholic. So you're trying to find out, where do you fit in here? And you reach in the book and you pick through and find your problem in that book. I began that process. I wrote down every scene that happened in the book. And there was a lot of them. There was like 180 things happened in the book. And now, maybe more, maybe 200. And, only 35 of them are going to be in the movie. So you start making checks by the ones that really interest you. Scenes in the life of Jesus that really interest you. Then you look in there and you've now checked 20 scenes. You say, why did I check those 20? What is going on inside me that is being this kind of selective? And then you start to figure out where you fit into this book and how you can use this book to find a path for yourself. Not to be faithful to the book, but use the book as you would a metaphor.
But have you ever just started with like a visual or one scene and then written from there?
No, I'm not. I've been asked by 3 different directors who are visuals, Nick Rogue asked me to do something, and I realized, I wrote a script for Nick Rogue, I realized that Nick didn't want a story. He just wanted some images, and that's not what I do. And then Antonioni asked me once, and after meeting with him, I realized he just wanted 40 pages of kinds of stuff that he could create images for. And so by the time Wong Kar-wai came along and asked me, I said, Kar-wai, you don't want me. You don't want a writer like me. I'm the worst thing for you. So artists who work that way, who essentially are painters, David Lynch being one, Terry Malick being another, that is a different process. And it's not the process that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I could do that.
Next question.
Hi. So I had this kind of interesting experience in my undergrad, not at DePaul, with a professor that left a question lingering in my mind for many years, and I'd like your take on it. I had just recently seen Alphaville, and I was really excited about it because I hadn't seen Alphaville before, and it's an amazing movie. And I come up to him, and I'm trying to talk to him about it. I'm trying to get him engaged, and he wasn't really interested in it or talking about Godard. I was curious about, like, is it part of Nouvelle Vague, but it's kind of not, but it's in that period, but it's Godard. And I'm trying to ask him, and he's like, stops me, and he goes, I'm kind of done with my basic film education, so I'm not that interested anymore. Like, it's just not something I haven't thought about, and I've moved on, quote unquote. And the question that lingered in my mind wasn't about Godard or Alphaville. The question that lingered in my mind was, is it possible to be done with a film education at some point in your life? Like, am I going to reach a point in my 50s or 60s where I'm going to be like, oh, I'm done. Like, I don't want to talk about Godard anymore because that's old.
I just hope that person isn't teaching.
No, it wasn't at DePaul.
It hasn't happened to me yet, but you can reach a point where, like Philip Roth, he's in his 80s. He announced 2 years ago that he was not going to write anymore, and he was not going to read any new material, that he was going to spend the last years of his life rereading the books that had meant something to him in the past. Now, I think that's a kind of valid thing to say when you see your lifespan being rather short. You say, I don't care anymore who the hot young filmmakers are. I want to just spend my remaining years thinking about this medium I love and seeing the movies I loved when I was young and seeing them again. But if you are still working, that's a kind of retirement position. If you are still working like I am, then you have to see everything. You see everything. And that's what I'll miss about the multiplex, because you can go in there and, watch every movie in there in an hour and get out. You see 10 minutes of this one, 10 minutes of that one. No, they're doing that, they're doing that, they're doing that. And, particularly in an industry where the technology is reinventing itself so quickly. I was just saying to David, so you can't make a gangster film anymore. People say, oh, wouldn't it be great to do a classic gangster film? No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't go. Ben Affleck did it. They Live by Night, $100 million. Nobody went. No one wants to see a classic gangster film anymore. You can't. There's no point where you stop innovating. And you have to remake yourself.
I think his point, though, was the opposite. It wasn't that he was going to stop innovating, was that he felt like he was done with his education in terms of classics. He was done with Nouvelle Vague. He was done with Italian Neorealism. He was done with, and that's why he didn't care about any of it, and he was just looking forward. And I look at it, and I'm like, there's just too many films for me to ever finish.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you're not... you go back and look at those old films with fresh eyes, and you learn stuff, particularly now, particularly as your craft grows, and you sort of know the ins and outs, and if a certain scene looks this way, when you first saw it, you didn't understand how they lit it. Now you understand how they lit it, and you understand why it was good or bad, and so you can continually re-educate yourself. And then, of course, there are all these incredible pockets of film history that are now open to us. It used to be there was probably only, 400 or 500 films that were available to you. Now there's 50,000, 100,000, and they're all there on torrent. You can watch an entire year of Malaysian films, if you want. So there's always pockets of stuff out there that's invigorating.
Okay, let's have another question. Thanks. Speak into the microphone, please. And
Okay, so my question was about, you mentioned when you're directing, you kind of take a break sometimes when you're stuck, and then it comes to you. Do you have any advice for writer's block when that happens? Do you do anything specific with your writer's block? Yeah.
Writer's block, you have to determine what kind of writer's block you have. You could have writer's block where ideas essentially dying, and you're trying to keep it alive artificially. Well, nothing's really going to help you there. It's better just to let that idea die. There's another kind of writer's block where you know it's there somewhere, and you're trying to get at it, and you can't quite get at it. And that's where walking and riding come in house. I used to find when I lived in Los Angeles, I would have certain paths I would walk to think out an idea, or certain places I would drive. And I found ironically enough, that I often got the idea that I was looking for right after I hit some train tracks or some road in the rough road, and just the jarring in my brain sort of freed me up. So the first thing to do when I write a block is get mobile, get moving. Don't just sit there. You're going to die in that chair.
Okay, another question?
Hi. So you mentioned watching a lot of crime films for Dog Eat Dog, and I was just wondering how you kind of assimilated your influences into your own voice. Like, I know all of us are in film school, and we're kind of discovering these creative auteurs from the past, and you mentioned before how you don't want to watch a movie and then make a movie just like it because it's already been done before. But I'm just trying to bridge that gap between these influences and my own voice currently. In just, I'll see a movie where I really want to borrow elements for it, but I don't necessarily know how to translate that into a modern movie or something that would make sense to a modern audience.
Yeah, well, let me give you a different example from crime films. Give an example of the film I just made. Okay, so directors who work on the slow side, who do contemplative cinema, there are around 10 devices they like to use. One is the long take. Another is the delayed cut. Somebody exits the door and they just hold on the door. Another is no music, only using non-diegetic, don't use non-diegetic sound. Anyway, so there's a buffet of techniques. Planometric composition, center punching. These are all techniques that directors use to distance you so that they sort of lean away from you. But no director uses them all in the same proportion. So a Bellatar is going to do an incremental lateral dolly, whereas another director is going to lock himself off. And what I realized in all this research is that you go to the buffet, like a big old Chinese buffet, and you start picking stuff up, and you find what goes best on your plate. And what so I had these sort of rules. I wasn't going to move the camera, but then, one day I did. And what I discovered in doing that film was I had a main character who was the main character in Diary of a Country Priest. I had a premise that was stolen from Winter Light by Bergman. I had an ending that was stolen from Ordette by Dreyer. And I had a levitation scene that was stolen from Mirror by Tarkovsky. So I had that, and I had these elements. Now, when I finally look at them all woven together, you know what I see? I don't see any of those films. I see Taxi Driver. I see the glue of Taxi Driver collecting all these elements together. The craziness of Taxi Driver. Collecting these odd elements in this distant way. And, that's the answer to your question, which is you can steal your heart's delight, but the glue which connects these is going to come from you.
Great.
All right, thank you.
I think we have one more question. Is that right? Two more? Two? Got time for two, Paul? Two more. Thanks.
Hello, Paul. I'm Alex. And my question is, nowadays in American screenwriting, they usually tell you that you can only write what you can see or either hear on the screen. For example, in Taxi Driver, you sometimes go so deep into describing Travis's personal thoughts, inner desires, and aspects of his characterization that it takes a whole...
I'm losing this. Can you start over?
I'm not there, sorry. In screenwriting, they usually say you can only write what you can hear or see on the screen. in Taxi Driver, you go very deep into describing characters, characterization, so it takes a novelistic term sometimes, but you never see it in modern screenplays. So my question is, what defines how far you can go from describing only what you can see to describing something more deeper or personal?
I think that if you're writing for someone else in particular, you have to strike a poetic edge in that person. So that's where you start writing poetic stuff, you know, whether it's for an actor, you know. He feels like a door has closed inside his heart. You know, how do you play that? Well, the right actor will understand exactly what that means, you know. And if you say he looks around and realizes the room was much smaller than he thought it was when he went in. How do you film that? You don't know. But it's part of the kind of mystery of it. Like often when I'm directing, I will say to an actor, I do not know why this character says this, but I know he does say it. I know he opens his mouth and these words come out, but I can't tell you why he says it. And, you know, sometimes that's all it takes for the actor to understand. And so those kind of mysteries, if embedded, even in your own work, can be springboards to visual ideas or even shots or even props, you know?
Okay. We've got one more question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, speak really.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. So my question is it relates a bit to writer's block, but maybe a bit deeper to creator's block. And the power of suggestion is so unbelievably strong, especially when you're working with people that you highly respect.
Just a sec, hold on.
That's all right. And it's Scorsese, take it. I mean,
No, actually, it was somebody calling from Cannes.
I'll make this quick. So it seems as though, I guess my question is, how do you not listen as well? And how do you give yourself, because it seems like people are trying to learn, but it seems like they're also trying to seek permission to create what they've always wanted. And what if one of your problems with writing is affecting your ability to actually write or to create or to see as clearly? And if you've ever gone through that, which I hope is rhetorical, and it's con, just and how you've given yourself permission to do the things you've always wanted, to transcend those rules and to not listen.
Well,
especially amongst people like Scorsese, and you're getting so many shoulds.
I mean, I'm a little confused. I mean, how do you give yourself permission? I mean,
well, for instance,
I mean, if you're being paid to do something, I suppose you need that permission. But if you're writing something yourself, why do you need permission? I mean, if you say to yourself, I would like to see this woman cut her hand off. Do you need permission to do that? No. I mean, it may not sell, but you don't need permission, you know? You can do anything. So I'm not quite sure.
I guess maybe to hopefully articulate it a bit better is, there's a quote by Degas that says, painting's easy when you don't know how, but very difficult when you do. At the beginning of my professional career, I was very close to my instincts and very fluid. Then I heard a lot of kind of like unhealthy shoulds, not even about my work, just about the industry, from professionals that I respected. And it was tricky because almost like I'm on a journey of trying to unlearn those things to get back to that fluidity.
Well, you know, there's no reason to be in the creative life if you can possibly do anything else.
Yeah.
And if you can see yourself finding a measure of happiness and satisfaction, not looking into yourself, do it. I mean, it's very frustrating in the creative life. And sometimes it comes, you know, it doesn't always come as bidden. And, you know, it's, I was saying to somebody the other day, I said, I think I've been involved in 4 great films, and they're all about 20 years apart. Now, if I'm such a good filmmaker, why does it take 20 fucking years? I don't know the answer to that. You know, we make mistakes, and you know, there are things you need to walk away from, and if you can walk away from it, maybe that's not such a bad thing. But you know.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay, well, let's give a round of applause here for Paul Schrader. Thank you. Thank you so much. Was that really from Pan?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Hello. Thank you so much. We're going to ask you to clear the theater for those guys who are coming tonight. You can check in at the front desk. Thank you. And we'll see you in the evening. Thanks so much.